Well, it's finally happened, fellas. I've built my very first AMD Threadripper machine using the new 24-core 9960X and a beefy Asus workstation motherboard. I've wanted to do this for a long time for a few reasons, but I can never justify dropping the cash. Until now. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I actually built this system, what parts I went with, and answer the biggest question: was it even worth it? So why? Why Threadripper? Well, for those of you that don't know, Threadripper is AMD's high-end desktop or workstation processors that sit between a Ryzen and an EPYC, and seem to take the best of both worlds. You see, years ago, before Threadripper even existed, Intel was the king of the HEDT world because they were the only ones with that platform. Fast forward to today, for various reasons, Intel has completely stepped away from this market and AMD has stepped in. But what is a high-end desktop or a workstation platform really mean? Well, to make a long story short, you can get more CPU cores, more PCIe lanes, higher clock speeds, and support for some server-esque features. In general, you just get more of everything and it's faster. So why did I need this? Well, I don't know that need is the right word. I find it hard to believe that anyone is going to tell you that you need to build a Threadripper system, but I wanted one for a few reasons. One is because I've never had an HEDT setup before, and considering this has been my hobby for nearly 2 decades, I figured it was about time. The other one is that I really wanted more PCIe lanes on my main workstation. In general, most consumer platforms give you 20-ish lanes to work with. Most of the time, 16 of those are taken up by a GPU, leaving you with very few. And sure, you could bifurcate the lanes sometimes to utilize a bit more, but this setup dwarfs those numbers with 88 usable PCIe Gen 5 lanes. That is plenty and allows me to fully utilize my GPU, my 100 gigabit NIC, and multiple NVMe drives, and still have more left over for expansion and other testing. I'd say the last reason I've wanted a Threadripper system is for editing. So yes, there is an actual use case for this. I'm not just building it to run benchmarks and have it be a web browsing machine. This is going to be my main workstation for video and photo editing, as well as some 3D modeling when I eventually learn Fusion. So those are my reasons. Don't like them? Too bad. Now let's talk about the actual system. The two most important pieces in here, obviously the processor itself and the motherboard. And you know where you can actually get these? Micro Center, baby. I went down to the Houston store to snag some parts for this build, and they actually had both the 24-core 9960X and the 32-core 9970X in stock. I was so close to going with the 9970X, but I figured 24 cores is plenty. The motherboard I went with is the Asus Pro WS-TRX50 Sage Wi-Fi. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but this board is a beast, and it's not even their highest-end Threadripper board. Now, of course, with a new 350-watt TDP chip and a comical amount of power connections this motherboard requires, I needed a new power supply. I chose this 1500-watt Corsair HX1500i Platinum unit, and it is a beefy boy. And it was awesome just being able to walk into a brick and mortar store in 2025, just be able to buy high-end parts like this. So shout out to Micro Center for existing and also providing the motherboard and power supply for this build. Unfortunately, I did have to drop my actual dollary dues on the Threadripper. And the rest of the parts. And Micro Center is coming soon to Phoenix, Arizona, so go ahead and sign up for VIP days and get a free 128GB flash drive and the ability to shop exclusive deals before the grand opening. Check it out now using the links down in the description below. Next piece was the RAM, and these systems use registered DDR5 DIMMs, so you're most likely going to end up with ECC, which is great for stability, but not so great for your wallet. I went with a 128GB kit, and that ran me about $800. Yes, these numbers are going to add up quick. And of course, we're going to need something to cool this processor, and after doing some research, it seemed like this Arctic Freezer 4UM was the best bang for the buck at just $50, and you'll see later that it performs pretty dang good. For a boot drive, I just used one of my 2TB Corsair NVMe drives I had laying around. Yeah, weird flex, I know. And that's it. That's the build. I threw this on a test bench for now because I want to do some comparisons to my existing setup, and moving the cases around and stuff just didn't make sense yet. And wait, I think we're missing something, right? Yeah, we need a GPU, and I think I actually have one laying around here somewhere. I think this should do, right? Okay, yeah, that was a bit, but I actually did go and buy an RTX 5090. Cringe, I know, but I have a very specific reason for getting this card. This is the only 2-slot 5090 or even 4090 that exists, And I need that because anything larger would block off my other 16X PCIe slot on my motherboard. So I had no choice, right guys? Right? For the love of God, please go down and comment, yes, Brett, you needed that 5090, because I really need to justify this. All right, yeah, let's actually put it in here. Okay, now that's our final setup. And in total, this build here will run you around $5,400. And that is a lot of money. And I know that can be subjective, but we'll get into whether or not it's worth it soon. So a few nuanced things about this build that stood out to me when putting it together. One was obviously how much power this CPU and board requires. We have dual 8-pin CPU connectors, the 24-pin, a 6-pin PCI, and an 8-pin PCI. All of this before even adding the GPU. Luckily, the RTX 5090 only requires this single 12-volt high power line, which is good, I guess, if it doesn't catch fire. Another thing was that for a $900 motherboard, I would have expected native Thunderbolt or USB 4 support. Like, seriously? Asus even gives us a USB 4 header, but that requires you to purchase their USB 4 PCIe card to use it. I snagged one off eBay, so we'll see how that works out. I'll throw some text down here if it comes in time for this video. And now, initial setup was a little rocky, I must say. When I first fired it up, I was getting the 00 code on the motherboard and nothing was happening. In general, when you're having trouble with your motherboard, there are two solid troubleshooting steps. First one is to just unplug everything, including your RAM, then insert a single stick back in and try booting again. If this doesn't do it, then the next step is to update your BIOS. I did this with Asus's Easy Flash function, which is freaking awesome. You load the new BIOS onto a USB drive, plug it into the designated slot, and press the button. This is all without even turning the system on, and you can do it without even having a processor installed. This worked like a charm, and I was ready to go. Kind of. I noticed that only 64 out of my 128 gigabytes of RAM was detected, but I figured I'll deal with that once I got Windows up and running. However, later in the install process, I was notified to plug in the additional PCIe power connectors on the motherboard to ensure everything would run properly. Before then, I didn't even have these plugged in because I just assumed it was for additional auxiliary power for PCIe cards. Nope. So after all that, everything was good to go and my system was running great. Now for the fun part. How does it perform? Obviously, great. If you were expecting me to be disappointed, I'm sorry. When it comes to testing out a new system, there are a few approaches you can take. One is to run a bunch of benchmarks and take those numbers and quantify the amount you spent versus the increase from your old system. The other is the eyeball test. Does the system feel faster, more responsive? Is it more stable? Are there more usable features that benefit your workflow? I'm more in the latter camp. I wanted to boot this thing up and have my video editing feel smoother. I wanted less crashes in Windows. I wanted Wake on LAN to actually work. But that's not to say I didn't run a few tests to make me feel better. The first thing I obviously had to do was run Cinebench and Geekbench, and the numbers were obviously higher. I guess I should mention that my old system is no slouch with a 13900K, an RTX 4090, and 128 gigabytes of DDR4. And it was pretty comical to see the system pulling 500 watts in Cinebench. And this was before I even had the 5090 installed. I was just using one of those tiny little Intel A310s. The test I actually cared about was rendering, since video editing is primarily what I use my workstation for. I took an existing 4K project I had with a few different codecs and effects and compared the H.264 export time for each. My old system was pretty freaking fast at 3 minutes, but this setup crushed that by cutting the time down to 2 minutes. That's like 33% faster. And I was a bit nervous because my 13900K has Intel QuickSync, which has really good transcoders for all kinds of codecs, but the RTX 5090 and the new build compensates with NVIDIA's new transcoders in the 5000 series and its support for 10-bit H.264. Long story short, the 5090 is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the export. But real-time editing and certain effects are heavily influenced by the processor, and according to Puget Systems, the 9960X is one of the best chips on the planet for DaVinci Resolve. I'll link their write-ups down below because they go into way more detail than I ever could. I actually tried running their Puget bench on my system, but it just wouldn't run for Resolve. I'm guessing it's something to do with my install, I don't know. But for the eyeball test, I want to say that the editing experience does feel snappier. This could very well be the placebo effect in action, but man, just let me be happy. And for gaming, I mean, come on. It's a Threadripper with an RTX 5090, so it plays games great. Nobody is buying this for gaming though. I'm legit just going to be bad at League of Legends with this thing, and that's probably it. In terms of power usage, we are seeing higher numbers, but surprisingly not much at idle. My old system sits at around 140 watts and the Threadripper system at about 150, so 10 more watts for a good bit more horsepower on the hardware. When we're rendering out a project though, it is a bit more. I was seeing around 650 watts on the Threadripper system and roughly 400 watts on my old setup. But now for the actual reason that I built this system, to fully utilize my 100 gig ConnectX-5 card. Before, I was limited to 8 lanes of PCIe Gen 3, which is 64 gigabits per second, unacceptable. With this new setup, we don't have that limitation anymore, and I get all 16 lanes. I have my workstation connected to my Windows server that hosts an NVMe pool, and I do this because Windows natively supports SMB Direct, which uses ROCE, which is RDMA over Converged Ethernet. I think some of you say ROCE or ROCE or whatever. I just say ROCE. I apologize. Basically, this is just a way to make your network shares go insanely fast. In my Crystal Disk Mark test over the network, you can see just how fast we can get with plain old SMB. That's absolutely insane. Now, does this transfer over to the real world though? No, not really. I'm still looking at about 1.5 gigabytes per second on file transfers. So in theory, and with a different workload, I'm sure this upgraded system would be beneficial. In my own reality, not so much. So yeah, there you go. I know this was a bit different than your normal system review, and that's because I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. There are plenty of videos and write-ups for how this hardware performs for plenty of different workloads, but what I wanted to do here was show you a real-world use case for how and why I built this system. Let's see if I can do a good job of summarizing here. Obviously, this is an amazing system, but it's equally as obvious that it's expensive. Is it worth it though? Well, it clearly depends on how you use your workstation and your financial situation. But instead of giving you some lame cliche answer, I'm just going to say it. Yes, I think it's worth it. For me, I've greatly increased my quality of life when it comes to the actual work I do, which is video editing. My renders are faster, my editing experience is smoother, and I have way more PCIe lanes, and this system technically supports more RAM if I need it. And here's the thing, my old system was already a top-of-the-line machine, so imagine the increase if you were coming from an older, less powerful machine. And even further, my projects aren't even that large. I mean, yeah, I have some 4K ProRes and some H.264 clips thrown here and there, but that's nothing compared to what some actual professionals deal with. And for around $5,000 for this entire setup, for how it performs, I really do think it's worth it. If you have the money, of course. Is that to say I'm recommending you build this system if you edit YouTube videos? Absolutely not. Not even close. I'd wager that 99% of people who make YouTube videos would be perfectly fine with a system that costs a fraction of this, especially if you work with proxies. So please, don't let the message you got from this video be, Radal says you need a Threadripper and a 5090 to make shitty YouTube videos. But yeah, that's it. I'll be moving this setup into its permanent home after this video is done, and I may make an update video in a year or so with my long-term thoughts. Let me know down in the comments if you want to see that. If you like this video, then drop a like and subscribe for more tips on how to spend a bunch of money. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube members and my Patreons. You guys are my Threadripper system with a 5090 that is just so fast, so powerful, and just an absolute wallet crusher. Y'all are the best. And if you're still watching, you're an Intel HEDT chip. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.